You've promised yourself 1,000 times that this time you'll follow through. This time, you'll wake up earlier. Stay focused. Keep your word. But by the second week or the second day, it all collapses. Not because you're lazy, but because something inside you is quietly fighting back. This isn't about willpower. It's about identity. And until you confront the shadow behind your self-sabotage, you will keep losing the same war, no matter how many times you begin again. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Most people think discipline is about routines, systems, alarms, or forcing yourself to push harder. But Jung saw it differently. He understood that the parts of ourselves we avoid, the ones we're ashamed of, the ones we silence, don't just disappear. They become the architects of our behavior. And what we call lack of discipline is often just the shadow acting in our place. You scroll when you should focus. You binge when you should rest. You sabotage progress when things are going well. Not because you want to fail, but because a part of you is still convinced that success is unsafe. That consistency will expose you. That finishing something will remove your last excuse for hiding. Let me tell you about Sarah, a 28-year-old designer I know. Every January, she'd create elaborate vision boards, beautiful planners, color-coded systems. But by February, she'd be back to scrolling until 2 a.m., skipping workouts and feeling like a fraud. She thought she lacked discipline, but what she really lacked was integration. The part of her that wanted growth was at war with the part that remembered being ridiculed in high school for caring too much. And until those two parts could have a conversation, no system in the world could save her. This video is not about fixing you. It's about remembering you. The part of you that never stopped believing, even while the rest of you kept running away. Let's start here with a truth that might feel uncomfortable. There's a version of you that wants to grow. He's focused, driven. He sets boundaries and keeps them. He wakes up early with purpose. He keeps his word even when no one's watching. He moves through his days with intention and clarity. This version of you believes in possibility. He dreams big and takes action. He's not afraid of being seen, of standing out, of taking up space in the world. But there's another version of you, the one who avoids pressure like it's poison, the one who whispers, "Let's not try too hard. Let's not be seen. Let's not risk failing again." The one who says, "Remember what happened last time you got your hopes up?" The one who convinces you that mediocrity is safer than magnificence. Most people call that second voice weakness, laziness, self-sabotage, the enemy. But Jung would call it your wounded protector. The part of you that learned long ago, in ways you might not even consciously remember, that effort was punished, visibility was dangerous, and excellence came with a price you weren't willing to pay. So what did you do? You split. You created what Jung called a persona, a mask, a false self that looks responsible to the outside world while secretly avoiding true responsibility. You chase productivity while sabotaging discipline. You buy planners while ignoring deadlines. You talk about goals while fearing their achievement. You research success while avoiding the work that creates it. You consume content about growth while remaining safely stuck. And every time you fail to follow through, you don't just feel frustrated. You feel shame. Deep, gut-wrenching shame. Because on some level, you know the truth. You're not breaking routines. You're betraying a part of yourself. The part that still believes. The part that still hopes. The part that still dreams of what could be. Think about the last time you promised to wake up early. You set the alarm with genuine intention. You meant it. You really did. But when morning came and that alarm pierced through your sleep, something happened. A voice whispered, "Just 5 more minutes." And you hit snooze. Not once, but 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, until you were running late and had to rush through your morning, starting the day already behind, already defeated, already disappointed in yourself. And in that moment, something died. Not just the plan, but trust in yourself. Your ability to keep promises to the person who matters most. You. That betrayal repeats, day after day, week after week, month after month, until it becomes your personality. Until I'm just not a morning person becomes. I'm just not a disciplined person. Until I'll start Monday becomes. I'll start next month. Until this is the year I change becomes. Maybe I'm just not meant for more. Jung called this phenomenon the shadow, not evil in some demonic sense, but shadow as an unspoken, unseen, unacknowledged. The parts of ourselves we've relegated to darkness because we decided they were unacceptable. The ambitious child who was told to be realistic. The creative spirit who was called impractical. The person who once believed they could change the world before the world convinced them to settle. The dreamer who was mocked for dreaming. The achiever who was resented for achieving. The one who tried so hard and got hurt so badly that trying became dangerous. Pause here and take a breath. Is this what you've been carrying all along? Your shadow isn't trying to destroy you. It's not your enemy. It's trying to protect the version of you that once believed before believing became dangerous. The version of you that once tried before trying became painful. The version of you that once hoped before hope became a setup for disappointment. But here's the thing about protection without integration. It becomes prison. And that's where you are now. Trapped between the person you want to become and the person you're afraid to disappoint. The person who once tried and got hurt. The person who once cared and got mocked. The person who once shined and got dimmed. Trapped between growth and safety. Between authenticity and acceptance. Between who you are and who you think you need to be to survive. But survival isn't living. And protection isn't power. And the very thing that's been keeping you safe is also keeping you small. Now here's the truth Jung wanted you to face. The truth that will either liberate you or terrify you. You cannot build discipline from a place of rejection. You can't conquer the lazy part of you by beating it down. You can't shame yourself into consistency. You can't hate yourself into wholeness. You have to speak to it. You have to dialogue with it. You have to ask it the questions no one ever thought to ask. Where are you protecting me from? What story are you telling me about what success costs? How old do you feel right now? What do you need to feel safe enough to let me succeed? Because here's what most people don't realize, what most self-help gurus will never tell you, what most productivity experts completely miss. The part of you that scrolls endlessly instead of working on your dreams. The one that delays important conversations. The one that escapes into Netflix when you should be creating. The one that numbs out when you should be showing up. That's not the lazy part of you. That's the part that remembers when trying led to pain. When caring led to disappointment. When hoping led to heartbreak. When being seen led to being rejected. Maybe you were criticized for dreaming too big. Maybe your effort was ignored or your enthusiasm mocked. Maybe you were told, directly or through subtle messages, that you were too much, too intense, too ambitious, too sensitive, too different, too loud, too quiet, too fast, too slow, just too. And so you learned to dim your light, to lower your voice, to shrink your dreams, to expect less and try less and be less. Because being less felt safer than being rejected for being more. And so now, even as an adult, even as someone who logically knows better, your nervous system still flinches at the idea of full commitment. Not because you don't want it, but because you never grieve the boy who did, the girl who believed, the teenager who tried, the young adult who hoped. Let me tell you about Marcus, a 32-year-old software engineer who couldn't finish a single side project. He'd start with passion, working late into the night, dreaming of building something that mattered. The code would flow. The ideas would come. He'd work for weeks, sometimes months, getting closer and closer to completion. And then, right before the finish line, he'd abandon everything. Delete files. Stop responding to collaborators. Find reasons why the project wasn't worth finishing. His friends called it perfectionism. His therapist called it fear of success. His family called it lack of follow-through. But Jung would have called it shadow work. Because when Marcus was 12 years old, he proudly showed his father a story he'd written about space explorers. 50 pages long, complete with illustrations. The culmination of months of secret work. His father glanced at it for about 10 seconds and said, "That's nice, son, but you should focus on practical things. Stories don't put food on the table." And then he handed it back and went back to watching TV. That moment split Marcus in two. The creator went into hiding. The practical person took over. And for 20 years, every time the creator tried to emerge through a side project, the practical person would sabotage it. Not out of malice, out of protection, because finishing meant being seen, and being seen meant risking that same dismissal, that same casual destruction of something he poured his soul into. Until Marcus learned to have a different conversation. Instead of fighting his avoidance, he started asking it questions. What are you afraid will happen if I finish this? What story are you telling me about what success costs? How old do you feel right now? What do you remember about the last time I cared this much? And slowly, through patience and curiosity instead of force and frustration, he began to understand. His procrastination wasn't weakness. It was a terrified 12-year-old, still trying to avoid his father's disappointment. His avoidance wasn't laziness. It was a protective mechanism that had been running in the background for 2 decades. His self-sabotage wasn't self-hatred. It was self-preservation. Misguided, perhaps. Outdated, certainly. But originally rooted in love. In the desire to protect the tender part of himself that had been wounded by someone who should have protected it instead. This is what Jung called the transcendent function. The ability to hold opposing parts of yourself in conscious dialogue rather than unconscious warfare. Instead of fighting your shadow, you learn to dance with it. Instead of conquering your resistance, you learn to understand it. Instead of overpowering your fear, you learn to befriend it. If this part hits something in you, keep going. The next few minutes might feel like a mirror. Your shadow speaks through your patterns. Every time you choose distraction over focus, it's saying, remember what happened last time you cared this much? Every time you quit before the finish line, it's saying, let's stop before they can stop us. Every time you sabotage your own success, it's saying, I'd rather fail on our terms than succeed on theirs. Every time you break a promise to yourself, it's saying, disappointment is easier when we control it. And until you hear that voice, really hear it, without judgment, without trying to immediately fix it or change it, you'll keep mistaking its protection for your personality. You'll keep thinking you're undisciplined when you're actually overprotected. You'll keep thinking you're weak when you're actually wounded. You'll keep thinking you lack willpower when you actually lack integration. But here's the paradox Jung discovered, the beautiful irony that changes everything. The shadow that sabotages your discipline is the same energy that could fuel it. That protective instinct that keeps you from trying, it could become discernment about what's truly worth your energy. That fear of being seen that keeps you hidden, it could become selectivity about who deserves to see your authentic self. That resistance to commitment that keeps you perpetually starting over, it could become wisdom about what's truly worth committing your life to. That sensitivity that was once mocked, it could become your greatest strength. That intensity that was once shamed, it could become your superpower. That ambition that was once crushed, it could become your guiding star. But only through integration, only by making the unconscious conscious, only by turning toward the part of you that's been running the show from the shadows, only by treating your resistance as information instead of opposition, only by honoring the intelligence of your avoidance instead of fighting it. Right now, I want you to think of the last time you sabotaged your own progress. Close your eyes and go back to that moment. Ask that self-sabotaging part. What were you trying to protect me from? Write down whatever comes up, without judgment, without trying to fix it, without making it wrong. Just listen, because your shadow has been trying to tell you something important, and it's time to finally listen. So what does integration actually look like? What does it mean to dance with your shadow instead of fighting it? How do you build discipline from wholeness instead of self-violence? It's not what you think. It's not hype. It's not another system. It's not about grinding harder or wanting it more. It's a return to self-honesty, a return to self-compassion, a return to the kind of conversation you might have with a frightened child who's been hiding in the closet for years. You stop asking, how do I become more disciplined? And start asking, who am I afraid of becoming? You stop asking, why do I keep self-sabotaging? And start asking, what is my self-sabotage trying to teach me? You stop asking, how do I force myself to be consistent? And start asking, What would consistency look like if it came from love instead of fear? Because discipline, at its core, is not control. It's not about forcing yourself to do things you don't want to do. It's devotion. It's the sacred rhythm of someone who remembers why they began. It's the natural expression of someone who has made peace with all parts of themselves. Integration starts with what Jung called active imagination, consciously engaging with the parts of yourself you've been avoiding, fighting, or pretending don't exist. When you feel the urge to procrastinate, instead of immediately forcing yourself to work or giving into distraction, you pause. You breathe. You ask, what is this feeling trying to tell me? What is this resistance trying to protect me from? What does this part of me need right now? And then you listen, really listen, without trying to fix it, without trying to change it, without trying to talk it out of being afraid. You might discover that your procrastination is actually fear of not being perfect, or fear of being too visible, or fear of outgrowing the people you love, or fear of discovering you're not as talented as you hoped, or fear of success, meaning you'll have to maintain a standard you're not sure you can sustain, or fear of failure, meaning everyone will see that you're not as capable as they thought. All valid fears, all understandable concerns, all worth honoring and exploring rather than dismissing and fighting. When you begin honoring the intelligence of your resistance instead of fighting it, something profound shifts. Your procrastination becomes information about what matters most to you. Your avoidance becomes a map of where you're ready to grow. Your self-sabotage becomes a teacher about old wounds that are ready to heal. Your patterns become doorways instead of prisons. Remember Sarah, the designer with the beautiful plans and broken follow-through? When she stopped trying to force discipline and started having conversations with her avoidance, she discovered something that changed everything. The part of her that scrolled until 2 a.m. wasn't lazy. It wasn't weak. It wasn't broken. It was the part that remembered being called too intense by friends in college when she'd get excited about her art projects. The part that remembered her mother saying, "You care too much about things that don't matter." The part that remembered teachers telling her to tone it down when she'd share her creative ideas with enthusiasm. So she learned to scroll as a way of dimming her own light, of staying safely mediocre, of never risking being too much again, of numbing the part of herself that felt things deeply and cared about beauty and wanted to create something meaningful. But when she began to dialogue with that part, to thank it for trying to protect her, to acknowledge how hard it had been working to keep her safe, she could finally ask the question that changes everything. Is this protection still serving me? Is staying small actually keeping me safe? Or is it keeping me from the life I came here to live? What would happen if I let myself care deeply again? What would happen if I let myself be intense again? What would happen if I let myself be too much for people who can't handle my authentic self? And slowly, the answer became clear. It wasn't serving her anymore. The people who couldn't handle her intensity weren't her people. The world needed her full brightness, not her dimmed version. Her resistance to discipline was really resistance to a life half-lived. And the moment she made that connection, everything changed. Not overnight, not magically, but gradually, organically, naturally. She began to wake up earlier, not because she forced herself to, but because she had things she was excited to create. She began to focus better, not because she used some productivity hack, but because she was no longer at war with herself. She began to follow through on projects, not because she had superhuman willpower, but because she was finally aligned with her authentic desires. When you begin honoring time again, not from fear, but from alignment, your days change. Your mornings are no longer punishment for not being disciplined enough. Your routines no longer feel like chains binding you to someone else's idea of success. They feel like freedom, like coming home to yourself, like the natural rhythm of someone who remembers who they are and why they're here. Because discipline, when built on integration rather than self-violence, is not forced. It flows. It emerges. It becomes inevitable. It stops being about proving something to the world and starts being about staying true to yourself. It stops being about becoming someone else and starts being about becoming more yourself. Take a moment here. How would your relationship with discipline change if it came from self-love rather than self-improvement? How would your goals change if they came from authenticity rather than approval? This is what Jung meant by individuation, the process of becoming who you actually are rather than who you think you should be, rather than who your parents wanted you to be, rather than who society expects you to be, rather than who you think you need to be loved. Just you, your authentic, integrated, whole self. And paradoxically, when you stop trying to discipline yourself into someone else's image of success, you discover your own natural rhythm. You find that consistency isn't about forcing yourself into rigid systems that work for other people. It's about honoring the deepest truth of who you are. It's about following your own inner compass. It's about trusting your own timing. It's about building a life that feels authentic to your soul. And that truth, that authenticity, that alignment, it has its own momentum, its own discipline, its own sacred order. Not because you're forcing it, but because you're finally allowing it. So now I'll ask you the question that might change everything. Who would you be if you stopped betraying yourself? What would your days look like if you stopped rehearsing failure and started living as the person you were always becoming? What would your mornings feel like if they were based on excitement rather than obligation? What would your work feel like if it was aligned with your authentic gifts rather than what you think you should be doing? What would your relationships feel like if they were based on who you actually are rather than who you think you need to be loved? Who would you be if you stopped abandoning yourself every time someone else disapproved? Who would you be if you stopped dimming your light every time someone else felt threatened by your brightness? Who would you be if you stopped making yourself small every time someone else couldn't handle your intensity? Carl Jung believed that wholeness, true wholeness, is not achieved by perfection, not by becoming some idealized version of yourself, not by transcending your humanity, but by embracing every part of yourself, even the part that resists, even the part that avoids, even the part that's afraid, even the part that procrastinates, even the part that self-sabotages, especially the part that's been hiding in the shadows, trying to protect you from a pain that might not even be relevant anymore. Because once you reclaim that shadow, once you integrate those exiled parts of yourself, once you stop being at war with your own psyche, you don't just become disciplined. You become sovereign. You become integrated. You become whole. And that wholeness, more than any morning routine or productivity system or life hack, is what makes you unstoppable. Let me leave you with one final story, one that might help you understand just how profound this transformation can be. There was a man, let's call him David, who spent years fighting his laziness. Every Monday, he'd start a new routine. Every week, he'd try a different system. He'd set alarms, create elaborate schedules, punish himself for failing. He read every productivity book, watched every motivational video, tried every app, but nothing worked. Nothing stuck. The harder he fought his resistance, the stronger it became. The more he tried to force discipline, the more he procrastinated. The more he hated his lazy self, the more that lazy self seemed to take control. It was exhausting, demoralizing, soul-crushing. He began to think there was something fundamentally broken about him, that he was just one of those people who would never amount to anything, that he was destined for mediocrity. Until one day, after another failed attempt at a morning routine, he tried something different. Instead of fighting his lazy part, he sat with it. Instead of hating his resistance, he got curious about it. Instead of trying to overcome his avoidance, he asked it a question. How long have you been carrying this burden for me? And suddenly, like a bolt of lightning, he remembered. He was 8 years old, sitting at the kitchen table with his homework, working as hard as his little mind could work. His mother was in the next room, crying. Again, she'd been depressed for as long as he could remember, but it had gotten worse after his father left. And somehow, in his 8-year-old mind, he'd made a connection. When he achieved something, when he brought home good grades, when he succeeded at anything, his mother would cry. Not because she wasn't proud of him, but because his success reminded her of her own unfulfilled dreams, her own abandoned potential, her own sense of failure. And so, in the way that children do, he learned that if he achieved too much, his mother would feel worse about herself. He learned to underachieve, to stay small, to never let his light overshadow her darkness. For 25 years, his procrastination had been an act of love, a sacrifice to protect someone who was no longer there to protect, a loyalty to a promise he'd made as a child to a mother who was drowning in her own pain. And in that moment of recognition, everything changed. Not because he forced new habits, not because he found the perfect system, not because he discovered some secret productivity hack, but because he finally understood the profound intelligence of his resistance. He finally saw that his lazy self wasn't his enemy. It was his protector. And once understood, once thanked, once honored for its service, it could finally rest. He wrote a letter to his 8-year-old self. He thanked that little boy for trying so hard to take care of everyone. He told him it was okay to succeed now, that his mother's pain wasn't his responsibility, that his light didn't diminish anyone else's, that he was allowed to shine. And slowly, gradually, naturally, his relationship with discipline transformed. Not because he forced it, but because he freed it. Your shadow doesn't need to be conquered. It doesn't need to be destroyed. It doesn't need to be transcended. It needs to be understood, honored, integrated, loved. Because the energy you've been using to fight yourself, the massive amount of life force you've been investing in this internal civil war, that's the same energy you need to build the life you want. So stop trying to fight your shadow. Stop trying to eliminate your resistance. Stop trying to become perfect. Start sitting with the parts of yourself you've been avoiding. Start getting curious about your patterns. Start asking your symptoms what they're trying to tell you. Learn from them. Listen to them. Thank them for their service. And then, gently, lovingly, with infinite patience, lead them. Because the man who can lead his shadow is the man who no longer needs discipline. He is disciplined, not by force, but by remembrance. Not by violence, but by integration. Not by becoming someone else, but by becoming more himself. Write a letter to the part of yourself that sabotages your progress. Thank it for trying to protect you all these years. Ask what it needs to feel safe enough to let you succeed. Ask what it's been trying to tell you. Ask how old it feels. And then listen, really listen to its answer. Your resistance has been trying to teach you something important. It's time to finally learn. You're not broken. You're not weak. You're not lacking discipline. You're not missing some crucial piece that everyone else seems to have. You're simply carrying parts of yourself that haven't been seen, heard, honored, or loved in a very long time. Parts that have been trying to protect you from dangers that may no longer exist. Parts that have been trying to tell you something important that you haven't been ready to hear. And the moment you turn toward those parts with curiosity instead of judgment, with love instead of hate, with integration instead of elimination, everything begins to change. Because integration isn't about becoming someone new. It's not about fixing what's wrong with you. It's not about adding something you're missing. It's about remembering who you've always been. Beneath the fear, beneath the protection, beneath the strategies, beneath the masks, beneath the shadow. You, whole, integrated, complete, free. If this video resonated with something deep in you, I'd love to know in the comments below. And if you're ready to explore more of Jung's insights on becoming who you really are, there's more waiting for you here. The journey back to yourself doesn't require perfection. It only requires presence and the courage to face what you've been running from. Because on the other side of that shadow is the life you came here to live.